is for you. All you do is you receive the goods and then you share with your neighbors. Are you not being insensitive to your son? And my mother carefully and in almost disarming way said to my cousin, how far is my son? He's based in Johannesburg. I'm based in Bulawayo. If anything were to happen to me overnight, how long would it take him to get here? How long will it take my neighbor to just walk across and save me? And at that point, it became very clear to me and to my cousin that community mindedness, neighborliness are hallmarks of what our parents, our communities survive on. You take care of your neighbors, not because you have a lot with you, but you take care of your neighbors because on the one hand, you are securing yourself, you are creating your own security measures and mechanism, but you are also building a community through cohesiveness, sharing, and giving. So no one goes to bed hungry in our traditional setups when you have something to share. We actually have lots of sayings to that effect. In Ndebele, where I mean the language that I speak, we say, isisu somhambi asingakanani, meaning it doesn't really matter what you have. When you have a stranger, you share the little that you have with that stranger. And that's something that everybody has grown up with. And so the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are actually located in one of our very cultural foundations, which is that you don't let anyone around you go to bed hungry. So that's the first story that I wanted to give about how my cousin was trying to challenge my mother around how he thought was wasteful with what the diaspora was sending to her. Yet my mother saw that as a mechanism to secure her own security, but also make sure that she belongs. The second story is I write about this, which is really about the behavior of the elite among us, that whenever there's a misfortune, a death in a family, this rich person used to sign checks and just send checks to the family of the bereaved and never attended the funerals or any of the activities associated. Until one day when the rich person's child died and everyone in the community reciprocated, they sent checks to him and he was left alone with the checks and the whole idea of having to bury his child alone. This is a fictional story, but it serves to tell us the importance of community and how community is important. It doesn't really matter how rich, how poor you are. If you don't have a community around yourself, you are just left alone, lonely. And you can't imagine in our cultural settings having to bury your own child alone. Why am I telling these two stories? I'm telling these two stories because I think it's important to center ourselves in this debate, bring our personal experiences in order to understand what community philanthropy is. I came into philanthropy perhaps accidentally, I would say, in terms of my academic training and the practices that I then ended up getting engaged in. I was studying community empowerment, looking at how the women along the Zambezi River in the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe were surviving, given the history of that particular region. At some point, I was presenting in an international conference that paper focusing on community initiatives that women engage in order to survive when most of the men have gone into cities or migrated elsewhere, and they are left to fend for themselves, for their families. And as a result, they end up engaging in community initiatives, what in the African Philanthropy Network framework we have called many to many. In this case, you mobilize, pool resources together in order to address issues that affect many. But you could also pool resources in order to deal with an individual. In our settings and in different villages, growing up in Zimbabwe, you'll be very familiar with practices like cooperatives, practices like amalima, where you actually identify a family that does not have the tools of trade during times of planting or harvesting. And you all go to that family and dedicate your resources, your time for no fee. And you actually plant either in 1 day or 2 days. And in return, the family just perhaps prepares something to eat for you. But you have cleared the land, you have planted, and there you go. You have actually taken care of that particular family that does not have the tools of trade. And that's how you pull resources from several, but for the purposes of one household. And so that's many to one. And there are so many other frameworks that we can talk about. But I was talking about this in an international conference, and here was a professor from the City University of New York who was also talking about philanthropy and explaining it in very fancy words. And I was talking about these community initiatives. And I approached her and said, what you are describing sounds like what I'm talking about, except that we are using different words. Why are you using this word philanthropy? And her response was, I get this a lot wherever I go. Wherever I go in the global south and I talk about philanthropy, people come to me and say, you are describing our everyday practices and initiatives, but we don't call them philanthropy. We call them something else. I'm saying this because I think it's important for us to understand that when we're talking about community philanthropy, we should not be logged to the Western definition of what community philanthropy is, or community foundations are for that matter. And the book that we are launching today is on community foundations. And community foundation is a technical term that was developed in the United States around 1914 about how somebody thought they could deploy resources back to the community. But they created this institution that has got certain features, one of which is an endowment. The second of which is it has to be governed. It has to collect resources from the geographic location where you have set up this institution. The governance must reflect the population, the dynamics in that particular geography. But what this did not take into account is the African context. And in the context, we probably will not have a technical classification of a community foundation, but we will have community-like foundations or community-like institutions that meet the definition of a community foundation, but we won't call them community foundations. And I think it's important for us because we accidentally come across many of these terms, many of these jargons, and then we don't realize that actually it's just terminology, but in essence, we all have shared in one form or the other in community philanthropy. And so I then did a piece on community philanthropy and community foundations when I then decided to attend, this fellowship that this professor was leading. In fact, it was upon her invitation that she said, if you're interested in understanding philanthropy, you can actually apply and attend this fellowship. And this was way back, almost 20 years back when I attended this, and I wrote this article on community foundations in South Africa. And I was looking back at that article, preparing for this and realizing that I actually did not do justice to the article. I started looking at community foundations only around 1997 or so, when the concept was introduced in South Africa. But little did I pay attention to what was happening across the continent. And in Zimbabwe specifically, all of you would remember an organization called ORAP. ORAP, many years ago, ran a program around Vukuzenzele, which means wake up and do it for yourself. And in many ways, this was around issues of sustainability, issues of self-reliance, among others, which are hallmarks and features of community philanthropy. But the idea there was that ORAP would go to different households and require them to pay $1 each. And that $1 each would actually be collected into a fund, which would then attend to the problems that were affecting different communities. And as a result of that, the Community Foundation of the Western region of Zimbabwe was established. This was a long time ago. At the same time, in the 90s, Mrs. Graça Machel established the Foundation for Development Community in FDC in Mozambique, again using the same approach, going to the communities and saying we need to fund our own development. And those two institutions are very important in the history of community philanthropy in terms of organized and institutionalized formats of community philanthropy. But these are preceded by so many other forms of community philanthropy initiatives that underpin our different cultures. Everywhere in Africa, you actually have different initiatives that explain this. If you go to Rwanda today, you realize that after the 1994 genocide, the government of Rwanda decided that to improve its status, but also to create an economic environment that would deliver services to all, it had to go back to its initial and traditional initiatives. And these initiatives would include things like 1 cow per poor family. And all of you would know that in our own traditional settings, the rich, and in this case, traditionally, it was the chiefs, among others, they would make sure that they actually give or lend cows to the poor. And after a certain period, they would take them back, but leave something behind. And this was a common practice. And that practice was then institutionalized and modernized by the government of Rwanda, where each community would identify the poor among themselves, and then the government will mobilize resources from the private sector, from individuals, from the civil servants, and give 1 poor cow per family. What is the symbolism of this? The symbolism of this is that a cow in our traditional setups is a symbol of wealth. You give somebody a cow, you have given them dignity. And so just by giving a poor family a cow, you have given them dignity. But a cow is also useful and functional for many other things. In the government of Rwanda, and in Rwanda specifically, a cow has been utilized to assist in farming. A cow has also been utilized to produce manure or fertilizer for food gardens. And the cow has also been utilized for dairy in terms of milk and all of that. And so what the government has done is to actually track the performance of that program. And what the results show is that that program has uplifted a lot out of poverty, but also addressed the question of malnutrition among children. And so there's value in some of these community initiatives that are meant to address the public good. And so I've just given you one example of 1 poor family, 1 cow per poor family. But in our settings, this was not just 1 cow, but several cows. The other I described already was where you actually pool your resources to actually take care of each other. And we know today with the looming disasters and some of the challenges that we are facing, cooperatives are very, very important in serving the needs of our communities. You can spread them into different classifications: burial societies, savings clubs, among others, stock fails in South Africa. All these are initiatives that have been created traditionally by different communities, different sectors, in order to address community issues. But coming to the issue of community foundations, like I said, it's important for us to go back to the history and really give credence to some of the institutions and some of the initiatives that were set up long back before we had the introduction of American formats of community foundations. So I've given you the history of ORAP, which gave birth to the Community Foundation of the Western region of Zimbabwe. I've also spoken to you about Mrs. Machel and how she set up FDC. But we have then a very interesting period around the 1990s in Africa and more so in South Africa, where community foundations, as they are defined by the American system, were introduced in this continent. So in the first instance, we have to look at the history of community foundations through the mechanisms of three foundations: the Kellogg Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Mott Foundation. And this was an experiment that was done in South Africa with major communities and major regions establishing community foundations. So we had community foundations in Rustenburg, in Pretoria, in Cape Town, among others, and in Durban, and not many of them actually succeeded simply because the idea and the concept was just adopted and planted as it was without taking into account some of the contextual realities. Those that tried to adapt the concept and take into account the context actually survived. And so we have Utungulu Foundation, the community foundation of Rustenburg, among others, that really tried to take into account some of the contextual requirements, like making sure that it is funded by the community, that the community has a say, but also that the community sees itself as involved in the actions and the activities of that foundation. But also taking into account that an endowment in the African context might not really be a requirement for us to say we have a community foundation. And so those are some of the historical issues that I thought are very, very important for us to consider as we launch this book and discussing the new expressions of community foundations in Zimbabwe. The second thing that I wanted to say is that, of course, initially, the geographic factor was an important consideration in determining whether or not an institution is a community foundation or not. But what that concept did not take into account is the community definition from a different perspective, the community of interest. With globalization, migration, among others, you can't just locate community in a geographic sense only. You have to move beyond the geographic space and talk about community of interest. And so when you just locate yourselves in community, you will find that because of all these movements and diversity in a community, conflicts then arise, and a community is no longer a community because it's now made up of different identities and different contradictions. But within that, you can actually have community of interest. And therefore, community of interest would spread beyond geography. And I think it's important for us also, as we launch this book, to start thinking about community philanthropy, not only from the perspective of geographical understanding, what we do within a particular geography, but to thinking about what can be done within particular thematic considerations, but also particular interests, which span and go beyond geographies. And so it means we have to start thinking about what are the new issues, what are the new expressions, and what are the expectations from community philanthropy. And for me, as I begin to wind down, I see a couple of issues. So the first is that community philanthropy expresses itself in different ways today. It expresses itself in financial terms. And so we can depend on community philanthropy contributing financially to the resolution of different community initiatives, national initiatives, but also initiatives that cut across geographies, like I said. So issues of climate change is a looming pandemic for us. We can actually use community philanthropy as a way to respond to that. Give an example, when the cyclones hit Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi. In Malawi, there were few deaths that were reported, partly because the community was still so neat, so close together, and dependent a lot on traditional initiatives and traditional knowledge systems, to an extent that they would use fruits and the color of fruits. They would use some of the birds that would fly in to actually determine what kind of weather and what kind of climate we are likely to have this year. And so when they could tell that there was a cyclone coming on, they actually mobilized themselves as communities and asked everyone to move higher up or to find refuge within one another. And so they used community philanthropy to deal with that before and post the crisis. So you can use community philanthropy as a way to either mitigate or address challenges that would have affected a community and beyond. But there's also issues that have to deal with what I see to be some of the policy-related issues. Again, community philanthropy, through mobilization of communities, mobilization of interests, are able to put their voices together and be able to ask for certain policies within a particular sector or within a particular context in any government. And so in the current situation in Zimbabwe, community philanthropy becomes a bedrock for policy making, but also for policy formulation. And so there are expectations, I think, broadly on philanthropy, but there are also expectations on community philanthropy, because community philanthropy in many ways helps because it's based on the idea that communities are linked to each other, that communities of interest will drive certain initiatives, but they would also collectively make sure that no one is left behind. And so I think it's important as we launch this book, as we understand how Zimbabwe community philanthropy expresses itself, for us to link community philanthropy to different historical epochs. And so there's the idea that community foundations were established in the US, and then they were spread across the globe. And then in each particular region, they take on a particular context. But they are also contextualized. And like I said, in Africa, we cannot expect community foundations to have endowments, for example, but they can develop other initiatives and other factors and other features that will still make them relevant for development. At the end of the day, why are we developing institutions that we call community philanthropies? Because we want to make sure that no one is left behind. And so we have to link community philanthropy to the global agenda 2030, which is the SDGs. But also we have to take into account institutions and initiatives that pre-existed the actual modern institutional forms of philanthropy, the ones that we are perhaps launching today. We are launching these institutions, but these institutions are based on cultural, historical, and knowledge systems that already preceded some of these formations. And then also beginning to think about the role that community philanthropy will be playing as we go forward, especially if we look into some of the key challenges that are likely to face the continent. I have mentioned climate change, but there are issues of diversity, there are issues of gender-based violence, there are issues of ongoing social crisis that we are forever faced with. And of course, I cannot end without praising the many initiatives and roles that were played by communities when we were faced with COVID-19. I think if there's one moment that demonstrates the power of community philanthropy, it is during times of crisis. You can look at how we reacted to COVID-19 as communities. You can look at how we reacted to Ebola in West Africa. You can look at how we reacted to the droughts, how we reacted to the cyclones. You can also look at how Kenyans responded when terrorism happened and the Westgate Mall was bombed. So Kenya for Kenyans actually was given birth as a result of that. And when Haiti suffered massive earthquakes, we also had Africans here mobilizing in their biggest numbers in order to respond to that. So community philanthropy in many ways is the first resort before we can even talk about other forms of organized philanthropy coming into the continent. So I want to take this opportunity to really thank my colleagues at Civio, thank the authors, thank the institutions that took part in this study. I think this is the beginning of us really unpacking and beginning to understand the value of our own knowledge systems, the value of our own institutions, but also the value of our own form of philanthropy, which in many ways shares universally with the other forms of philanthropy elsewhere. I think that it's important for us to make this point that way back, we used to be characterized as recipients only, but that's not the case. Community philanthropy demonstrates that we have always been givers, we have always been philanthropists in our nature, and will continue to be so. And I think this book will demonstrate that. So let me end it there, Madam Facilitator, and thank everyone who has made it to the launch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that very interesting overview. I think what stood out for me was the way you highlighted the important role that women play in the establishment of community foundations or in the practice of community philanthropy. The example that you gave of your mother, but then also the example that you gave of grassroots and then ORAP, which one of the founders of that is the Zimbabwean Minister of Women's Affairs, Community Development, and Small Enterprises as well. So that for me stood out quite a bit, and thank you for that. And I think also just looking at a comment that has been posted by Itai, who's talking about the organic forms of socioeconomic shock absorbers, as they refer them to, as and just looking at how indigenous knowledge systems have been used. So that was quite insightful, and I really appreciate your contribution. I'd like now to hand over to another woman who's also involved in philanthropy, the practice of philanthropy, and the research of philanthropy, who is Halima Mohammed. She is an independent researcher and a consultant focusing on knowledge building, advocacy, and support to strengthen the narratives, practice, and impact of philanthropy in Africa. She's worked with a range of African and international philanthropic organizations, and she's written extensively on philanthropy with a strong focus on linking philanthropy to local agency and power. So in a nutshell, kind of taking on from where Professor Moyo talked about local agency and how indigenous knowledge systems are quite important. Halima is going to talk to us about why we should talk about community philanthropy. Halima, I will hand over to you. And just to note, I'll give about 15 minutes, if that's okay. Thank you. All right.
Thank you, Belinda. I think whenever Becky and I are on the same platform, we need to prepare beforehand. I just want to say ditto, 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 but I'll maybe expand on some of the things that Becky has said. There are two main things I want to touch on today that we have to be thinking about. The first is narratives, and the second is agency. And Itai, I'm glad that you raised in the chat our grounded conceptualizations of how philanthropy manifests in our everyday life, because I think we can't have a conversation about community foundations or community philanthropy without rooting it in the narrative of what does philanthropy look like on our continent. And often when we have these discussions, not of community philanthropy, but of philanthropy generally, we talk about foundations, we talk about endowments, we talk about strategic philanthropy, charity, social justice philanthropy. And we have to start to reframe that. When we have discussions on our continent, we have to center our language first. We have to recognize our giving systems. Aro, Owe, Takafu, Uku, Obwirano, Ujitolia, Ukusisa, Hama, Pataka, Asun, Lila, Ubuntu. I can go on. I have lists and lists. Becky has talked about some of them. Itai has mentioned some of them. But I think we have to start by talking about our notions and our understandings of what does philanthropy look like, how it is embedded in our everyday lives, how it is a glue that binds us together, how it is a form of social solidarity and collective humanity. And then think about what does that role play in the advancement of our societies, not just in times of crisis, but at an everyday level, both in times of joy, in times of crisis, in all times. And I think that it's really important that we begin to define and assert what our narrative of philanthropy looks like first and foremost. And our narrative has within it multiple narratives. It's not an either or. It includes the everyday giving that happens. And, people talk about one-to-one, one-to-many, but I feel like even those categories are restrictive. There are many, even horizontal and vertical philanthropy. Those categories are restrictive. What we're seeing is that giving takes place through so many different mechanisms, through so many different channels, by people across race, class, culture, and other divides. And we have to start to ground those narratives of giving, to develop. We have to start to ground those practices of giving in our knowledge systems and in our narratives. And a question we've been, a conversation that some of our colleagues have been having about is, can we say that we have African philanthropy? You know, what is different about it? And we can juxtapose it against the Northern narrative based on several issues. You know, a Northern narrative talks about top down. It talks about from those who have to those who don't. It talks about degrees of separation. It talks about it doesn't recognize reciprocity. It doesn't recognize relations of affinity. So we keep getting surveys that talk about how generous you are in a society. And one of the fundamental questions of those is, how many times have you given to a stranger? In our African continent, relations of affinity are bound in our philanthropy. That's where we start. We start with Becky's mother's neighbors. We start with her community. We start with the people around us. When I remember when COVID hit, it was our neighbors, our communities, our family members that were the first to support us, and we were the first to support them. I think of all of the different kinds of initiatives that came out that began with where you are and where you know, and then expanded outward. So I think we have to start thinking differently about what's the narrative of philanthropy that we are putting forward, what we center. It's not the Cleveland Community Foundation. And even when you want to talk about endowments, I mean, the first university in the world, the longest standing and still existing university in the world, first, was based in North Africa, set up through an endowment by a woman. So we want to challenge these notions of, oh, that's not philanthropy because they just give to each other, or they just give to family, or they just give for immediate things. I think our narratives are multifaceted. We have to create space for recognizing that it's not an either or. We're not saying we want to take our narrative and fit it into a Western narrative. I think that we have to think about what's a new global narrative for philanthropy, and where do all of these different geographic narratives fit in. And I don't think that some of what we're talking about in our narrative is particular to the African continent. When we look at communal societies that are rooted in reciprocity and solidarity in places like Latin America, in Malaysia, in India, and indigenous societies in the global north, we see some of these practices. We see an alignment in what looks like giving that's very similar to ours. And so I do think at a broader level, we have to start advancing for a different global narrative on what does philanthropy look like, and then talk about what does that mean within our context. And narrative is important on many levels. There's a narrative about what philanthropy looks like, which for many is institutionalized top-down. And there's a narrative about what philanthropic change needs to look like. And the last few years, we've seen several critiques around philanthropy and power, and how the power within philanthropy to dictate and determine what is needed in other countries and other societies and other people's lives has really been a force of harm, as it is trying to be a force of good. And lots of people have been interrogating that. We have many different conversations around the changes that need to happen, from decolonization to shift of power to localization to DEI, trust-based philanthropy. They're all grounded in certain value sets, and we have to think about what within those makes sense for us, but that's a different conversation. The reason I bring that up is that many of them talk about how philanthropy is setting the agenda. And the agenda is being set by those who control money and power on behalf of those who are living injustice. Becky talked about
communities of interest. And I like to think about it about constituency-led agenda. So even when we talk about the local, who are we talking about at the local level? Are women's voices included? Who are the most marginalized within societies? And I think it's important that we talk about power because we want to not just talk about what's wrong within the system, but we also want to talk about where there is hope. Where are the spaces where things are being done differently? And I think it's important that we locate community philanthropy within that. And I want to again underscore Becky's point. Many of us talk about community philanthropy. I don't use community foundations because it brings a certain perspective, it brings a certain lens, it brings a certain set of tick boxes that don't fit how philanthropy looks like on our continent. And by using that framing, we will tend to miss out what much of our organized community philanthropy looks like, our collective community philanthropy. So I do think that there's a bigger conversation, a much more bigger conversation to be had around community philanthropy and understanding the many different forms and shapes that takes on the African continent. I think that so that's the first part about narratives. The second thing I want to talk about is the issue of agency. And all of the global narratives about what philanthropy needs to do and needs to change are focused very much on power. And they're focused on shifting power, on changing power relations, on changing power dynamics as the solution to advancing a different kind of society from the philanthropic lens. They do not talk about agency. And I think we have to root our discussions in agency, which is the ability for people to make decisions about their own lives. And the roles that community philanthropy play are critical in this. They're not the only player. There are multiple other players in advancing agency. But we were talking here about community philanthropy. And I think community philanthropies are sites for democratizing philanthropy. When the global narratives talk about how we need to democratize institutional philanthropy, look at many community philanthropy organizations. It's already democratized. There are lessons in here that I think need to be thought about much more critically. Community philanthropy organizations are not just pooling of resources. There's elements of reciprocity, of solidarity, of mutuality within them. They don't just look at grant making. They look at a range of issues. Some of them may look at grant making, others are operational, right? So again, the differences between the Northern narrative or the Western narrative and our narrative of community philanthropy need to be looked at. But I think that there is a centering of agency and power in community philanthropy that says we are the ones who define what we think our issues are. We are the ones who are defining what we think are the appropriate solutions and strategies. For many, the framing is not coming from outside. The framing is coming from inside. And I think that's a big difference for why community philanthropy really is a fundamental lever for change. Majority of our institutionalized top-down philanthropy is trying to make changes, but they're tweaking. They're making small changes, leaving the big issues untransformed. Community philanthropy, on the other hand, is taking ownership of what they think the big issues are. Who decides is really important. And so I think we have to locate our discussion on community philanthropy within who decides and the power that gives. There's a perception of Africa as a continent of takers. And I think we have to start to change that perception, not just by showing what our philanthropy is, but showing the power located within that. There's a role for all of the other development players to play here. But I think that we have to start to think about how do we center our roles in advancing agency and how community philanthropy plays a critical role in that process. Belinda, I think my time is up. Over back to you.
Thank you so much, Halima, for that great overview on what we should talk about. I think from me, what I took from there is that the global narrative definitely needs to change, and that we focused a lot on power that comes with the big money from big foundations. And we've missed agency. You know, we've missed the work that's happening on the ground, different communities working together. So that was really insightful. Thank you so much. And I know you did say that you don't like the reference to foundations, you know, because we do miss a lot of the unstructured giving that's taking place. But I'm going to invite now Tendai Murisa, who is the Executive Director of Civil Institute, to kind of give an overview on the research that we did, which was on community foundations in Zimbabwe. So of course, this doesn't take away from all the unstructured giving that's taking place, in the same way that Big was raising it. But here we also wanted to kind of highlight the work that is happening within foundations and the work that they're doing there. Of course, this is not exhaustive, as Tendai Murisa is going to highlight, but it's a start to kind of changing the narrative of what is happening on the ground. For those of you who may not know, Tendai Murisa is my boss, Executive Director of Civil Institute. Tendai is passionate about Africa, and he is always looking for answers and answers and solutions to take the African continent forward. His research focuses on citizen agency, solidarity, philanthropy, public policy, and he's done a lot of work on looking at land and agrarian reforms in Africa. He's written a number of books. Of course, you know, he's co-author of the one that we're launching today, but other books that he's written, Whose Developments, Beyond the Crisis, and Beyond the Crises, and Land Struggles and Civil Society in Southern Africa. Tendai, I will invite you to unmute your mic and talk to us about the Community Foundation study and, of course, the work that we did in bringing this book together.
Oh, thank you so much, Belinda, and good morning, colleagues. I think it's morning for most of us, maybe except for the colleagues in Australia. It's early evening for those who are joining us from Australia. I think, like Halima said, it's very difficult to speak after Becky, but it's also more difficult to speak after Becky and Halima, because as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to the area, the field of African philanthropy, we are led. Becky and Halima have done some significant work in this area over years for a very long time, focusing not only on South Africa, but also the African continent. And as we were preparing the program, we're very deliberate in saying we need to set the Zimbabwean discussion within a particular framing. And for us was to say, we need an understanding of the African context and also the global. So I'm glad that Becky and Halima brought that to the fore before we do a deep dive on Zimbabwe. So I suppose that from now on, in the rest of the presentations that are coming, we are now doing a deep dive on Zimbabwe. But for us, just talking broadly about Civil Institute, our interest, like Belinda has already said, is about this concept of citizen agency and also reasserting African dignity. Because for too long, as Africans, we've been seen as those who carry the begging bowl to the global north. So we've always been seen as those who do not have, who are always looking for help. But the more you dwell in this field of African philanthropy, you'll know, for those who look at the work that I do, the writings that I make, I write across the whole sort of field of philanthropy. So it's not just about what communities are doing, but we also explore together with the center that Becky leads, what high net worth individuals are doing and the philanthropy that they're sort of promoting, etc. So the idea really being to push back, to begin to say Africans of different social classes and positions are actually engaged in an active process of giving. So this is one of the things that we are trying to really promote and to begin to say, we should not just be looked at as those who are on the receiving end. And even the studies that Becky cited the incidences around Cyclone Idai, around Ebola breakouts, around cholera and typhoid here in Zimbabwe. When you really look at the first responders, it is the communities that respond. It is neighbors that do respond to these disasters. The big funders, the institutions, come 48 hours later, 48 hours later, 72 hours later, a week later, or a month later. But a lot of work would have been done by communities. The only difference being that communities do not spend time writing op-eds or PR pieces to say, we have done X and Y for our neighbors. So we tend to miss that sort of urgency that is taking place. Even in the instances of drought, Itai is very right when he talks about Zundera Mambo, Ispala Senkosi, etc., because those are the first instances of response to any disaster in a context. So we see this and we begin to say, let me start off by acknowledging that it's just not the term foundation that is contested. Like Bergie said, it's also the term philanthropy that is contested, or that is alien in our lingua franca as Africans. We rarely talk about things that we do as philanthropy, either because it's just too big a word, or we've actually found better ways to describe it. So we normally talk about concepts such as giving, we talk about solidarity. So you'd ask now, so why are we using two concepts that are contested, philanthropy and foundation? Because both are contested, but we are using them. I think number one, we've embarked on what I'll call maybe a dangerous but necessary process of trying to insert African practices within global lexicon. Because the challenge we have, as long as we keep on talking about an exceptional route, that this is how we're structured, this is what, the conversations, we can never have a uniform conversation with colleagues from the global south. We can never create connections with what is happening in the global north and us in the global south. But when we begin to use certain terms, but we begin to appropriate their meaning, to begin to say, when we Africans say philanthropy, we mean this. When we Africans say community foundation, we mean this. It becomes very important. And because the real challenge is to challenge this myth that Africans do not have urgency. So they are out juxtaposed to the community philanthropy and the foundation. So community philanthropy that Halima was making sort of reference to, just in a summary, is number one, values driven. It's hard work, it's informal, it's spontaneous. At times it's hard to measure, it's continuous. It's embedded in words like izandla ziyagezana, kandiro kanofumba kunova kamwe. All those things are talking about who we are as a people. So there's this broader framework of Ubuntu. I am because you are. I cannot exist as an island. I'm part of different connections. I thought one of Bergie's stories would have been about how he is a beneficiary of philanthropy from the time he was born until the time of death. Africans, we benefit from different forms of giving at every stage of our lives, especially the significant stages: your birth, your upbringing, maybe your wedding, and even your death. Communities come together to celebrate that and to give to those causes. So that's kind of sort of the community philanthropy that colleagues like Halima will be making reference to. But within that, there are also some organized forms. They do not call themselves community foundation. They are what Becky was talking about, stokvels, roscas, etc. And they are structured and they work according to that framework. And the underlying value being trust. We Africans, we tend to trust, we transact at the level of a handshake. So in many instances, this giving is on the basis of understanding that there will be a rainy day also in my house when I will need to help. So let me help now. But what are we talking about when we say community foundations? These are more deliberate, they are planned, they have structures. I think the joke around structures in Zimbabwe has resonance. They're also values driven. They also borrow from other areas in terms of how they are set up. So when we begin to look at the different formations, we'll begin to see what external influences sort of shaped them. They also provide a more sustainable, longer term approach or platform to thinking through 3 years of change, 5 years, a strategy, etc. We're beginning to see them emerge even in raw areas. They are also characterized by a thin layer of permanent staff. This could be full-time paid workers or volunteers. So these are things that sort of separate them. So what kind of community foundations did we encounter in this study? We carried out a study across all the provinces of Zimbabwe, which is 10. And in them, when we started off, the methodology team comprised of myself, Halima, Eda, and Shelley. So we spent a lot of time saying, what are we going to be looking for when we go into the field? So we began to say, no, look, we're looking for entities that, number one, pull a certain share of resources from the local areas. So they leverage on assets. That's very important for us to consider. So they may not fund their operations 100%, but 5, 10%, or 15%. And these assets do not necessarily need to be cash. It could be in kind. It could be volunteering of their labor. It could be volunteering of their land, etc., pulling together different assets. So we said that's one characteristic. The second characteristic being that they need to have members. It can be a one woman or one man show. There's to be evidence that they are members. That's what we're looking for. So when we got into the field, what did we find? We found what we may call local associations or clubs. These are your rotating savings groups, etc., organized around maybe just a women's savings club, etc. Then we found community-based organizations. In other lexicon, you may say this is a form of an NGO, but it's totally different from the modern NGO the way we know it. It was one of the defining characteristics of the ones that we studied was, number one, they had members, and number two, they were mobilizing local resources. Then there were those that were established through an edict, through the laws of Zimbabwe, the community share ownership trusts. These are mostly active in communities that lie contiguous to big mines. So you find these in areas where you have gold mines, you have platinum, you have diamonds, etc. So we found this spread across the country as well, and we studied them. Then there's one that is a bit contentious. It's something that we still want to spend more time studying. The Residents Association. It fits. The Residents Association has got numbers. It also mobilizes resources. It could be $1 per resident. It could be $5 per resident, but they mostly utilize local resources to help to improve their communities. So what do they do? Number one, what we found is they combine local resources with resources from elsewhere. And this is important when you say resources from elsewhere, because prior to this, the assumption was always that when you say resources from elsewhere, we're talking of institutional funders. But when it comes to place-based associations or groups, something like the Chivi Development Association or Guruve Development Association, these ones are working in tandem or in collaboration with locals here and the sons and daughters from those areas that are now in the diaspora. So you see those people in the diaspora now beginning to mobilize resources and bringing them back to these, what I'm calling the place-based associations. So we find these in most areas that we've been to. And some of these associations are contributing even towards rehabilitation of hospitals. We saw this in Berengwa around Mnene Hospital, where we see those in the diaspora contributing towards rehabilitating a hospital to service their community. So that's very important for us to understand the connection between the local and the diaspora on the one hand. But also, secondly, we cannot dismiss the role of international institutional funders in the form of maybe philanthropy organizations, these are foundations, and also NGOs working in association with these philanthropy or community-like foundations. So what did we study? We tried initially, you'll understand that this is a field that is understudied. There are very few studies that have been carried around this phenomenon, especially here in Zimbabwe. We had earlier studies that showed agency in the early 80s around Campfire and many other initiatives like that. Even ORAP, most of the studies that we have of ORAP were done in the first decade. So there's been a gap in studying agency. Of course, we're preoccupied with other things as Zimbabweans. But the question that we're asking is to say, given the crisis that we've been in the middle of, how are communities creating resilience? And one of them is through the community foundation or community philanthropy approach. So what we're studying so initially just to map, so outside of this book, there is a booklet that is on the website, which provides details of all the foundations that we came across, I think 25 or 27 of them. So that one is just giving you details of who they are, what they do. It's not the book. It's just like a directory, considered a directory. So because we felt that there's need to, number one, map and understand where they are, and also amplify the work that they do and their presence, hopefully so that they can also begin to receive support either from diaspora communities and other institutional funders. So the product from the study is this directory or database and this book that we have done. But in it, we're now trying to say, how do we structure? Because these are deep dives. You find that outside of the introduction, you are going into case studies. So the case studies are organized in such a way that, number one, we're looking at conditions that led to the establishment of this community entity, the foundation. Then we're asking, what is the purpose? What is the understood? What is the collective understanding of the purpose of this community foundation? What is the nature of the leadership? Who are the leaders? How are they elected? How are they chosen? What is the social basis of the organization? This is very important because some may be just, oh, this organization is all about women. This organization includes almost everyone. This organization is about the youth. So we try to understand that and even begin to go to the socioeconomic characteristics of those who are active in those organizations. Then we're looking at also the membership type. What levels of membership do we have, etc., and the decision-making structures and processes within this organization. So how are decisions to work on Project A made? Because we're also trying to understand the levels of participation. Because if Halima had been given more time, she would have gone on to challenge some of the ways in which international philanthropy works, in the sense that it actually at times dehumanizes or minimizes or reduces the capacity to participate. So in our trying to understand these platforms that are under study as sites of alternative thinking, the question that we're asking ourselves is to say, are they contributing towards a different kind of participatory development? To what extent do they allow members to set the agenda? To what extent do they allow members not just to bring in resources, but also to be part of the planning, the strategy, etc.? Then also to understand the context. What is the context that surrounds the work of this organization, and what is the kind of support that it is giving and it is also receiving? So what did we find? Like I said, 24 community foundations spread across the country. The common characteristics, number one, they've pooled funds or other forms of pooled resources. There's the giving of local assets at a community level or even from an individual. It's a membership-based focus. There's also, they are aimed at addressing issues in the broader community or society. So they're working mostly, this is very interesting also because in many instances, there is an attempt to shift or to change what these organizations focus on, given the realization that they exist on the ground. So many funders or would-be funders go there with set agendas. But for us, because it was a study, we wanted to know what they are actually engaged in. Most of them are engaged in what we may call the socio-economic space. So the others were focusing on broader social and economic development issues with a very clear link with SDGs. Others focusing on girls and women empowerment and gender equity. Others focused on health and education, youth development, and social service delivery. So these are very important sort of categories of the work that we did not come across organizations that will say, oh, we are a governance community foundation. They are mostly focusing upon tangible social service delivery, the delivery of services, etc., and also maybe helping access to certain social goods. Then, as I conclude, the challenges that we have in Zimbabwe is, when you go to the broader context, is the fact that for the past 12 months, the government of Zimbabwe has been focused around changing laws to do with the registration of within civil society. So we are finding that government's preference is for everyone to be registered as a private voluntary organization under the PVO Act. But our study showed that out of the 24 that we studied, 22 are registered as community, as trusts, while only 2 are registered as PVOs. Even the community share ownership trusts, and I think we studied 9 of them, are also registered as trusts. So given the challenges that we have around this law and the unclear circumstances of shifting from a trust into a PVO, and Eda will speak to this later on as we conclude, is the potential disruptions that may occur to work that is going on in the communities. So what are the benefits? What are some of the benefits of community foundations at the moment from our studies? Community foundations have been at the center of pulling together or creating resilience in many communities. There are sites, our method was to speak to those in the secretariat, those actively engaged, those in the leadership of the community foundation, and those who are supposed beneficiaries, the members, etc. So one of the things that we kept on hearing is the immediate assistance and the creation of resilience in communities, which is a very important part, because we've always said that the resilience can be created if you shorten the distance of support. NGOs, by their very nature, are mostly domiciled in the cities. They're either in Harare or in Bulawayo. So there is a distance, and that distance contributes towards two things. Number one, you may miss on local interpretation of how issues are articulated. Number two, it may take you time to come and respond to urgent issues that are being raised, and also their budget issues, and also their agenda issues. So we think potentially, and that's the reason why we did the book, potentially, even as part of government strategy, there's need for recognition of the role that community foundations are playing and providing them support. Because one of the things that we learned was issues to do with governance, internal governance in these institutions can be compromised because of limited access or limited exposure to best practices of how to run these foundations. At times, they end up looking like they've become personalized around maybe a network of leaders, etc. But it's very important for us to consider, to conceive the fact that they have also been not exposed to global best practice around governance. But also another benefit that they bring about is they are sites of training for local leadership that is required to be continuously developed to even occupy other public places, other public spaces, either into council, into political parties, etc. But the democracy that is sort of nurtured within community foundations through ongoing consultations, ongoing participatory processes, and making decisions, it becomes a breeding ground or a nurturing ground for leadership itself. So these, if you like, consider them as leadership schools that are spread and that are localized. It's very important for that. But also, finally, they bring dignity to communities. Communities feel like they have a sense of ownership. Communities feel like they can speak directly to issues being raised and issues that they are seeing, unlike when they are being told by experts what needs to be done. So I think there's that reconsideration to say, rather than trying to just go into communities and dictating what they should be doing, there's need for us to locate these as possible mediators, local landscape interpreters who can help us, for those of us who are in service delivery NGOs, for those of us who are in philanthropy, considering doing rural work. It's important to consider these community foundations as a possible pillar or layer in which we can sort of work alongside or use as a place for consultation. I'll end here, then I think we're going to some question time, then we can always come back and have more discussions.
Dr. Mlisa, thank you so much for giving us that overview of the study that we did, which then led to the book that we are launching today. And just as you've said, this was talking about the work that is being done in Zimbabwe. We wanted, of course, and we're going to do that later, to look at specific examples of community foundations in Zimbabwe. We've got a few people who are logged on and who are going to talk about the work that they are doing on the ground. But before we do that, we're going to go beyond the border first, and then we'll come back to Zimbabwe. We're going to have now Jeremy Maman, who's the founder and director at Initiative for Community Advancement in South Africa. He's based in the Western coast of South Africa, and he completed his qualification in community development work from the University of Western Cape way back, I won't say the year, and he's since occupied positions in many spheres of government as well as in nonprofit organizations on the Western coast of South Africa. Jeremy is going to talk to us about community experiences of community foundations outside of Zimbabwe. Once he's done with that, we're going to have the question and answer that Dr. Marisa has referred to, just looking at all the contributions that have been made so far. Then after that, we're going to go the deep dive that he talked about into community foundations in Zimbabwe, looking at specific examples from some of the organizations that are represented here. But first, Jeremy, I will invite you to unmute your mic and share your screen and give us a brief overview of what is happening outside the borders of Zimbabwe before we come back home after the question and answer section.
Belinda, thank you very much for having me. Really excited to be part of this book launch, really exciting book launch. What is happening outside of Zimbabwe is a lot. I mean, as you know, I mean, the world is really in a very interesting place at the moment with a lot of very, let me just call them interesting occurrences taking place right now. So I was asked to speak briefly about sort of the Initiative for Community Advancement, which is a community foundation that operates within the Bergrivier municipal area on the Cape West coast. So what we started the community foundation. In fact, I should put it like this: the community foundation transitioned into its current form from what was a national youth network named the South African Youth Leaders Network. And this network started way back in 2010 as an informal network, and then over years we've sort of transitioned. Officially in 2018, we transitioned into what is known as a community foundation. Now, interesting, the colleague just before me spoke very, very eloquently and critically about the perspective of what a community foundation is and how it's viewed from sort of the Western lens. And it often sort of, the way community foundations are defined, excludes the practices on the African continent, excludes the things that we have been doing in as far as giving for many a generation. And we're having to find ways to not just necessarily fit what we do into the broader sort of framing of a community foundation and philanthropy as a whole, but we need to find a way to use these community formations, development formations, organizations as enabling mechanisms for people power and people-centered development. So the community foundation, we thought, gave us exactly that. It gave us the opportunity within our region, within our municipal area, to do work that is required, but that is complementary to the work that are already being done by service organizations. So there's a number of community-based organizations that does terrific work within a municipal area. But often these organizations have found it difficult to get resourced for the work that they are doing because they might be small, they might not be visible through media platforms and so forth, but the work they do within communities are undeniable, the value of the work that these organizations do. So the community foundation model allowed us to do was to come in as an organization that then can create these mechanisms through which ordinary citizens, local businesses, and even the state could invest collectively into the development and addressing issues at the local level. Now, we've done this deliberately and actively since 2019 now, where we've built what we call community affiliated funds. And our focus for the community foundation in the last 4 years has really been on building and growing these community affiliated funds. Now, these are small funds. These are not by no means yet huge funds, but it is really, like I said, it's mechanisms through which ordinary citizens and companies can invest towards causes that they really care about. Now, we have a number of these, four of these funds. One of them is the Bergrivier Youth Fund. Now, Bergrivier is a municipal area. And like the previous speaker suggested as well, the community foundations mostly, they are place-based, and place-based might mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But in our instance, we realized it made sense to have a community foundation in a municipal area, because the municipal area, everyone in the municipal area has some sort of identity with the municipality and with the area where they live. So the Bergrivier Youth Fund is a fund that is, like the name implies, a fund for youth development, where young people from the local communities invest jointly through various fundraising initiatives into the youth fund. And then these young people have done interesting things. For example, they had like a spring market day. They sell food like braai, barbecue, maybe it's called in the rest of the world. plates of food and sell previously loved or formerly loved clothing was sold, are being sold to get money into the fund. So this year, and just as we speak, tomorrow, just yesterday, the second round of proposals, call for proposals, were opened by the Youth Fund, where we're now asking, or the Youth Committee are asking, for young entrepreneurs within our municipal area with innovative business ideas that need support, whether they are new businesses or established businesses led by young people who would want money to further develop their businesses or to start out their businesses. And the grant sizes within our community foundation are quite small. And let me not say quite small, because small is big, it's all relative, right? So the grant size is up to 10,000 South African rands, which we have found to be catalytic. It's really funding that could give the business a heads up or a head start. So that round opened just yesterday. So we're really excited about seeing these applications coming through, and the colleague have been inundated with calls and emails yesterday, people wanting to apply for the funding. So we also have, so that's a youth fund. We also have, in South Africa, we have a big issue with gender-based violence, and I often tell people how in 2020, in one fateful evening, our president announced in one of these what were termed family meetings. He said that the men of our country has declared war on the women of our country. That literally sent shockwaves through my body, that the men of this country has declared war on the women of this country. And so that birthed sort of the gender-based violence response in our country. And in our community foundation, we established what we call the Green Light Fund, which is really our gender-based violence response fund, from which we're actually encouraging, we're encouraging local people to invest into this fund, from which we will allow or fund projects that deal with the victims of abuse and violence, to get them that works with these victims and support them. So that is our Green Light Fund, and it's called Green Light because we're saying we're giving the green light to women, to the abused. We're giving the green light to victims to speak up and speak out against abuse. I'm just quickly speaking through these funds of ours, and the third fund we have is our Community Rebuilding Fund. That transitioned from our COVID-19 response fund, where we invested in COVID response 2 years ago. That transitioned because we quickly realized that yes, there's been a lot of response to COVID, but there's also the process in 2021 which is last year, we started talking about how do we rebuild though? I mean, what do we do next? And we all responded to the humanitarian crisis and global health crisis. But what can we do in terms of the next phase of development? And we then renamed our fund the Community Rebuilding Fund, from which we last year funded a number of small businesses to sort of get back up on their feet. One lady got some funding from a small community called Goed Verwacht in our municipal area, and she started a catering business from home. And eventually, a couple of months later, she actually got a contract at one of our at a cement mine called PPC in our area, where she's now running the kiosk on a day-to-day basis. So those are the kind of successes that we've been finding from our projects and from these funding, the small grants that we've made. And the final fund is our Dr. Swomers, our education fund, named after Dr. Swomers. So the education fund is unlike traditional funds. This is really a primary school scholarship fund, where from this fund, we will be giving full scholarships to children, primary school kids that's going to high school, for these kids who ordinarily would go to schools to high schools we might not be able to support them with their skill or their talent necessarily. So we're giving them an opportunity to go to schools that can specifically support them to further develop their skills and talents and natural aptitudes. So the education fund is targeted at that. So we have these 4 funds, and we're really excited. We have our local mayor at one of our when we launched the fund, the education fund. He was sitting in the audience, and he spoke up when we presented the fund and what we've already raised. He said that he's really excited about it and would love to match whatever we've raised at that stage, and he did that. So those are the kind of things that we believe the community foundations do, and that speaks to the point about the community foundations being a community foundation having to be able to mobilize resources and mobilize assets for the community, right? So I think that is one of the things that really excited and proud ourselves in being able to do and do more of. Often is, and we talk about assets, we don't only talk about money. We talk about all kinds of assets. For example, we've just recently been endowed by the cement company with a brand new youth center, which our community foundation has been asked to manage the day-to-day operations of. So we see that as an endowment of about 3.5 or almost 4 million is the initial figure for phase 1 of the youth center. Phase 2 will be another couple of million. So we talk about endowment. Suddenly we're not talking about, do we have 5 million rand in an endowment sitting somewhere? But we've been endowed with this building that can be used into perpetuity for the community and for the development to the value of 5 million as well. So how are we talking differently from an African perspective of what we mean with these very words that are being thrown around when we talk about community philanthropy or philanthropy in general? So this is in ways that we are able to mobilize a resource and assets for development. We are now in conversation with local partners to build actually another facility within Pakketberg, which is the administrative capital or administrative town of the municipality. Now, this facility we're really excited about is potential because it is actually a skilled school that we're in conversation with. Now, the audience here, you're some of the first to know about this. It's really only ideas on a piece of paper at the moment. But we've already brought together all of the players who's been involved in building 2 skilled schools already in the Western Cape. They're talking to ICA, the Community Foundation, about hosting a process, holding a process together to actually invest, for people to invest in the building of a skilled school for the West Coast, but the school being based in our municipal area. Now, the municipality is a player in the process. We're really excited about that. They've already allocated land where the school could be erected. And now it's a process of getting community members together. And we're going to get people together on the 2nd of November in a convening, what we call an education indaba, for people to actually be able to speak about why we need a skilled school. We talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution. We're talking about the future skills, but what does this mean for a rural young person, for people in a rural location? What does that mean when we talk about skills for the future? And how do we build those new future skills into the design and planning for this new skilled school as well? So those things we will be discussing on the 2nd of November at our education in Daba. So I hope that those kind of pieces are useful for this input. But just finally, I would love to just talk about some of our key challenges. One of them is actually around the framing of community foundations. What does it mean? So when we talk about community foundations, and for last week, I just recently returned from the UK, where attended the UK Community Foundations Conference. Now that was interesting, that experience, because it quickly made me realize that community foundations in the UK, for example, when they talk about community foundations, it's a really different kind of conversation. When they say community, it is not necessarily the same meaning that I have when I talk about community. When they talk about assets and financial resource, the numbers are exponentially higher, or much, much higher than the numbers that we might be talking about. But is it still the same thing we are talking about? Are we all still talking about the same organizational form? And is there ability for all kinds of community agencies around philanthropy to still sit comfortably around the same table? I think that was a critical reflection that I had in that engagement. Something that I considered that really bugged me over last week in the UK was the continuous talk about crisis. We appear to be living in a world of crisis, and in the UK right now, people are talking about the cost of living crisis that is here already, not that is pending, that is here. And as Africans, we've been living with cost of living issues forever. So it's nothing new for us. Now the problem or the issue then becomes, how do we, if we're living in this constant condition of crisis, how do we make ourselves crisis proof? How do we future proof our communities so that we are actually, like we've always been for generations, we're still able to bring back the things that worked for us historically. And what worked for us historically was Ubuntu, was Ujamaa. It was all of us doing together in looking after the most vulnerable within our societies. And we're having to be reminded of where we all come from and how that worked and got us to where we needed to get. So I'm hoping that this input was a useful contribution to the Community Foundation book launch. Yeah, thank you, Belinda, for that.
Jeremy, thank you so much for your contribution. Yes, it was valuable and it did make a difference. I think it gives us an idea of the work that you're doing. What I took from that is, and this is in one region, of course, there's obviously a lot other work that's going on in South Africa, but you talked about entrepreneurship and grant funding. You talked about work trying to deal with gender-based violence. You talked about social policy and work alongside local authorities. You talked about nation building, emergency response, and of course, education. And all of those are key areas, for the development of any African country, and South Africa included. So I'm going to open this up for questions right now. If there's anybody who'd like to make a contribution, I'm sure you can put your hand up on the chat, and then our team will give you permission to unmute. I think that permission might have already been granted to everyone in the room. So if you'd like to make a contribution or you want to ask a question to the people who've spoken so far, we have Jeremy, who's just talked about his experience from South Africa, Halima, who talked about why we need to talk about community philanthropy, Begi Moyo, who gave us an overview of what that is, and Tendai Marisa, who gave us an overview again of the study that we did and why we did that study. If you've got any questions to any of those people or comments that you'd like to make, please feel free to make that comment. You can just show us by raising your hand on the chat. As we're waiting for that, I'm just going to highlight that Stephen Berry was making a comment and he posted it in the chat. You may have seen it. He says, I like how you link the indigenous knowledge systems in managing climate crisis using empirical evidence from Malawi and community mobilization as a tool for community philanthropy, which greatly applies in our African context, and well done. And I think that's in reference to the presentation that was done by Prof. Moyo. Itai, once again, was referring to some of the platforms that are being used by different communities. One example that he talked about is in Swaziland, where the challenge he says for current scholars is how to bridge the old and this new. That's a contribution that he has made them. Okay. All right, so that's fine. So if there are no questions, I think we will move on and we will get some contributions now from insights on community foundations in Zimbabwe. So we want to know who are they, how do they function, and what do they do? We've got two people present, Stuart Mantula, who is the director at Community Foundation for the Western region of Zimbabwe. Of course, that's one of the case studies that we highlighted in the book. And we've got Cosmo Samanga, who is the director at African Self-Help Assistance Program. So I'm going to invite firstly Stuart to unmute and talk to us about the work that they do as an organization, Community Foundation for the Western region of Zimbabwe, just to give us a brief synopsis of the work that they're doing on the ground and maybe some of the key challenges that they're facing. Stuart, I will hand over to you. I will give you, is 10 minutes fine? If that's okay, I'll give you about 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you everyone, and good morning to you all. My name is Stuart Mantula, representing Community Foundation for the Western region of Zimbabwe. I think earlier on, Prof. Moyo talked about the Oracle institution and the birth of Western Region Foundation. The foundation rose out of the initiative of over 5,000 community members who contributed $1 each to form the funds that were used to establish the foundation. Why the foundation came out of that model is because ORAP has worked since 1980 to about 1995, whereby they realized that during that time, funds were being given throughout from the donors, international. There were times when they were not writing proposals per se, but they'll be told that we've got so much funds that you can then come and draw. They'll do the proposals after the funds have been given to them. But as time moves on, they realized that funds were beginning to dwindle. So they then started to make discussions, dialogue within the communities is the way forward. From some of the discussions that they came up to, realized that maybe it was imperative that they have on their own savings, they establish maybe an endowment. Because through discussions with the Institute of Synagogues, which is based in New York, that they were promoting community foundation. So as a result, the membership of ORAP then liked the idea of a community philanthropy, and they then decided to start contributing $1 each. About 50,000 women and men contributed $50 each. That became about $6,000 by that time. And that was the seed fund that was established to start the foundation. They then sought for funding from other donors like the Ford Foundation, OSISA, Kellogg Foundation, and stuff like that. The thematic areas that foundation was really looking at is education, health, women, economic empowerment, youth, and agriculture. Currently, the organization is mainly operating in Mat South, in Matabeleland South, which is under Mangwe and Bulilima district. Those are the areas where we are operating. The foundation has been there since 1998, and it's been operating in the 3 provinces of Zimbabwe, that is Matabeleland South, Matabeleland North, and Midlands province areas. That's why we have been operating. And we have got a structure that is composed of 5, in terms of governance, we have got a board that is composed of 5 people. Initially, it had 9 people, but as time goes on, it was reduced. The board is composed of people with various skills. On the initial stage, the provinces were also represented on the board, but because funds were dwindling, they then reduced the number to 5. Why the community foundation model? The community foundation model is easy to manage and is a geographic area of coverage. That's how ORAP decided to use this model. It has worked for us since 1988 to now. Some of the achievements that have been achieved are the construction of teachers' classroom blocks and teachers' houses. We have also managed to drill boreholes. We have also managed to do nutrition gardens. We have also managed to give grants to communities. Over 2 million has been spent on communities. Currently, we are running 2 programs. That's the provision of microfinancial services as well as women's economic empowerment. The microfinancial services has done wonders, really, is because it's being done in the rural areas. It's only the rural communities that are really managing the grant itself. It's not us who are in charge of the program, but it's the rural communities. We have got structures that are in charge of that project. It's being managed mainly in Mangwe and rural district. That is between the area that's next to where we share the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe, and also on the other hand, Botswana. We realize that those areas, most of the women and most of the men go outside to work in South Africa and Botswana and outside other countries like Australia, America, and stuff like that. So the people on the ground are the ones who are really taking care of the proceedings. But when they are not there, you find that the women are the ones who are in charge of the homestead. So the the financial services that we provide, that is being provided by the communities that we work with, they've come in handy because the financial services that are provided by the country, they are not there in the rural areas, but they are there. This service that we provide comes handy because you find most of the time people have use it to borrow money from them to do all the house chores or whatever they need to do. This has really assisted the communities that we're working with. And we've also another program that we are promoting, that's software concept whereby it's the women that are in charge of that. It's composed of about 15 to 20 women. They come together, they share ideas, we assist in terms of training, we assist in terms of giving guidance as to how they should then run the project. It has really helped the women a lot in those areas. And we realize that some political leaders, they've taken in charge of that process because they realized we've got so many numbers of women who are working in those projects. So they've really tried to work with them so that when it comes to political ground, they really help in terms of mileage when it comes to voting. In the past elections, those women, 3 women were elected into leadership of the councils. They are from different political background, different political parties. We've got people from ZANU-PF, we've got people from MDC. But whenever these women meet, we make sure that there's no political discussions that are being discussed there, but it's only development issues that are being discussed. This has really helped a lot in terms of peace in those areas. I think Dr. Marisa spoke about decolonizing the mind, the language that is being used under international arena. If you talk of community philanthropy talks about the communities themselves. It's a way how people have been brought up. It is something that has been practiced since time immemorial. It's not something new. Maybe it might be the language that may be different, but in terms of implementation on the ground and in terms of the way how we live, this is something that we've lived through. It has been passed from generation to generation. So in terms of community philanthropy, I think that's the model that people should use. It is easy and it's manageable. The communities knows what they want, and it's the ideal. It's unlike maybe if for donors who comes from outside who come in and tell you what we should do or how should we plan our work, but the community philanthropy process is the way of life within the communities. Some of the challenges that we faced mainly maybe is to do with the policy structures that are here in Zimbabwe, as well as that there's no legal framework for community foundation to register. Though, as for us, we're registered under a trust. That's the legal framework that is there, and the one that we are registered under. There's no specific legal structure where community foundation can register under. Then the other challenge that we faced really is the issue of when we lost the endowment that we had during the hyperinflation that took place between 2008 and 2010, with monetary investment that we had, as well as endowment in buildings. You realize during the 2008 to 2010 scenario, all the investment that we had by then, we had invested a lot of money under the unit trust, but all the money was lost due to hyperinflation. Then the most difficult issue was how do you then tell the communities that all the investment that they were told since inception, because the issue of giving the dollar that they are contributing did not stop. It is something that they continue to give up to 2008, 2010, when the situation on the ground became really difficult for people to have incomes, the extra incomes to give. So for us to convince the people that all the money that we invested with financial institution was lost became a big challenge for us. So, but then after that, what we did was to then come up with a new strategy of saying, maybe let's venture into social enterprises. We give grants to communities so that maybe whatever proceeds they get from the social enterprises that they are practicing, then they give about 30% of profit to the foundation so that we grow the endowment. Currently, there's a target of growing US 10 million for 2010, whereby the communities are part, they are in charge of that process through the social enterprises that they are doing. Then the other major challenge also was in 2016, when the board was introduced, because from 2010 to 2015, realized that we were using the US dollar. When the RTGS bond was then introduced, it meant if people borrow money, they would then pay back the money using the bond, using this, because the rate was 1:1. So they would take the US, maybe when they start paying back, they use the bond. Then in terms of value, we're losing. So that's the other challenge that we experience. I think I will stop there. I think Belinda is signaling that my time is up. Thank you.
Yeah, but thank you so much. I really appreciate the presentation that you've made, and just to commend you as well for all the work that you're doing. I think having a target of you said you have a target of raising 10 million, which is
Yes.
very, very commendable, and especially that these are rural communities. And you know, I think maybe other people may not have gotten it, but the microfinance services that you're running in the rural community, managed by the rural community itself, that is very commendable, very well done to you and to the organization that you are working with. That is a community foundation for the Western region of Zimbabwe. And I'm going to invite now Cosmo Samanga, who is the director at Africa's Self-Help Assistance Program. He's going to talk to us about the work that they are doing in their community foundation. Cosmo, if you are here, I will invite you to unmute your mic and talk to us in 10 minutes about the work that you're doing. Is Cosmo connected?
I don't see him. Maybe we could just proceed to the next one.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, you hear me? Hello?
Hi, Cosmo, we can hear you, although it's breaking up quite a bit. Maybe we'll try for a couple of minutes, but if it's breaking up too much, I might have to stop you. So let's just give it a try for about 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Now. Hello.
Hi, Cosmo. It's
hello, Brenda.
Hi, it's Cosmo. It's
Yes.
breaking up a bit.
Yeah. Yes. Can I proceed now?
Okay, you can. Let's try. You can proceed, please.
Okay. ASAP is the short term for Africa Self-Help Assistance Program. So ASAP is a PV organization operating in Manica 1994 and a technical cooperation agreement with the government of Zimbabwe. We started with education projects where we were paying school fees for the disadvantaged children and finding that there are other educational issues, such as lack of textbooks, lack of teachers' equipment and resources, inadequate or unsuitable classrooms, and teachers' accommodation. We tried to look at what exactly would help children achieve the best education like others elsewhere, so that they pass and proceed to tertiary level. Our intervention, assessments, and evaluations revealed that children needed help at home also for them to perform well at school. Therefore, we decided issues at home included lack of food, lack of clothing, and many more that reduced the children's self-worth. In fact, our initial interventions pointed us to other bigger challenges that we did not imagine. As we worked with parents to address education challenges, as we worked with parents to address education performance, our program evaluations again indicated to yet another set of challenges of broad scope, such as domestic violence, as the human rights, health challenges. To respond to these issues, ASAP to broaden the scope of its intervention, such that as we tried to help children, we were also helping the parents and the community at large for all-inclusive development. That's our program was broadened, and it called for improved fund mobilization, skills, technology, and sound strategic planning and management, and also improved the stakeholder management. ASAP operates in 60 districts of Manica province, namely Chimanimani, Chipinge, Mutare, where we have sustainable community structures such as the citizens advocacy groups, the ISAL groups, self-help groups, and the community facilitators. ASAP, we envision, that is our vision now, we envision a progressive and peaceful Zimbabwe. Hello? Hello?
Hi, Cosmo.
Yes, can I proceed?
Yes, please proceed, but maybe if you can turn off your video so that we can have a better audio, and then you can proceed.
Okay.
But you can go ahead, Cosmo.
He has muted himself.
Okay, I think we'll give Cosmo a few minutes to regain his connection. I'm going to invite now the second author of the book. Like I said, the book was written by 3 people. Dr. Tendai Murisa, who spoke to us about the study and how it was done. And it was also written by Eda Joa, who is a programs manager at Civil Institute, and Shelley Satuko, who is the current coordinator for the Center for Philanthropy and Communities. I'm going to invite now Eda Joa, who's going to talk to us about the present and future of community foundations in Zimbabwe, of course, based on the findings from that book. And then after that, we're going to come back to Cosmo. And then after that, we'll have another opportunity for questions from the floor. Eda, if you are ready, please feel free to unmute your mic and share your video. And I think if you've got a presentation, you can bring that up as well.
Great, thank you so much, Belinda. So let me just share my screen quickly. I realize I'm the only one that actually has a presentation. But my role, can you just confirm quickly if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So, yeah, I think this process and this book is something that was quite important, quite timeless. And I think from the discussions and the issues that have been raised so far, that came from the initial presentations or insights shared by Prof. Moyo, shared by Halima, shared by Tendai, just down to also the case studies, and the deep dive as Jeremy and Stuart and Cosmo have just done now, to just then try and share and give a deep dive or insight into into the respective community foundations and the work that they are doing. I think really highlights the importance, the value of community foundations, not only in Zimbabwe, but I think across the African continent. But just based on the study that we undertook and the insights, that we gained from this work, I think the key things that we saw from the case studies was that there's a diversity of work there's diversity in the work that these community foundations do. From socioeconomic development, there's been talk about, enhancing or advancing local entrepreneurship, to girl, women empowerment, gender equity. Examples were given around, how they're trying to deal with issues around domestic abuse, gender violence, to youth development, to social service support, within the space of education and health, through infrastructure development as well. So there is really a great diversity of work that these community foundations are doing, but we also note that there are some differences in terms of just the areas that they operate. For some, it's within one site, for others, it's in local or multiple sites. Stuart gave the example that they're working over 2 districts, but previously, I think at their height or at their peak, they were spread across not just Matabeleland South Province, but even Midlands and Matabeleland North Province. There's differences in their size, their membership base. The entities that we looked at, we had others who had membership bases were in their hundreds, to entities like Harare Residence Trust, which had over 36,000 members, and the youth formations as well that we looked at. Some of them had close to 50,000 members. So there are differences in their membership base. And that also then in turn also affects their budgets and the resources that they are able to mobilize. The majority of the entities that we studied were working with budgets of just under 50,000. We had 2 entities that we profiled where their annual budgets at that time, the information that they provided, they were working with annual budgets of over $500,000 United States dollars. And I think as Stuart also alluded to, for them as an entity, they've got their specific targets. They want to raise or have an endowment of at least 10 million United States dollars. But despite that diversity and the difference in terms of their operations, their size, and their budgets, what we've noted is that really at the heart of these initiatives is the social and economic improvement of the local area and community. Prof. Moyo, Halima, even Tendai alluded to the importance and the role that they're playing in improving the dignity and lives of people within the local area, and also showing that they can mobilize resources. The local resources, yes, are often then complemented with other external resources, but community foundations are allowing communities to then now be seen not just as recipients of philanthropy, but contributors towards philanthropy, you know, so they're active agents and active players within the philanthropic space or domain. It's not just something that's a preserve of the rich or the wealthy, but it's something that anyone and everyone can do. At the same time, the work that they're doing complements or enhances, you know, government state-led initiatives or programs targeted towards local community development. In what's been shared by the two entities, but also for those of you, once you have the chance to read through the book and the case studies, you'll see that it's not like they're doing anything or, you know, something that's divergently different to maybe state-led and even at times NGO, you know, led initiatives around community development. But I think the key thing for community foundations and the work that they do is that their work seeks to incorporate and involve local communities beyond just being final beneficiaries, to essentially be active agents in advancing local development through financial and other asset contributions. As you know, beneficiary or local communities are also seen as decision makers in the type of activities or projects to be undertaken. I saw that there was a question in the chat, you know, just trying to understand, like, you know, what does the leadership or governance structures look like, or what did we find? You know, so I think across all of them, across all the 24 case studies, in terms of, you know, governance structures, because as we said, 22 of the 24 registered as trusts, so they have board of trustees. Even the 2 that were registered as PVOs, they will have board members in place. But the majority of the boards and the board membership was from people, you know, with ties or within the local community. So, you know, we're seeing evidence that, you know, it also then helps in the decision-making process, that it's not necessarily that it's someone from outside or beyond the local area that's making a decision around what activities or projects to be undertaken, but there are, you know, locally based leadership structures that run these community foundations. It was also heartening to know that, you know, they are very conscious and deliberate, you know, around gender balance, also around the inclusion of youth or young people within their structures, and then trying to bring in a diversity of individuals and backgrounds. One of the questions we did ask was, you know, around maybe the education levels of people who sit as board members or as trustees. And the responses or the information that we gathered from the entities that we profiled really did indicate that there was a conscious effort or decision to include, you know, a diversity of individuals, and not to try and marginalize or exclude people because they didn't have a certain formal qualification, but trying to make then use of that local knowledge, you know, within that area or space to also then be involved in decision-making processes and also being part of, you know, boards. Their work also, you know, with the local communities also seeks to pool resources together. And there's, again, because communities contribute, they see themselves beyond just being beneficiaries, but as individuals that can make a contribution towards the development that they want to advance. So in doing so, the work of the community, these foundations also seek to enhance community agency, which is something that Halima alluded to in her presentation, you know, and the importance of that. One of the things that we did note, you know, is, and will come up as a challenge, but something that was very much evident across all the case studies, was the sustainability of community foundations over time. And the lack of sustainability over time will leave community foundations particularly vulnerable and unlikely to succeed in the long term. However, they've not, I think, just taken it lying down. Stuart alluded to, the financial crisis of 2008 to 2010 and how it decimated the community investment and endowment. But one of the things that they've decided that the Community Foundation for the Western Region of Zimbabwe did was to take on a social enterprise approach. And it's something that we did start to pick up amongst some of the entities as well, that they started, the promotion of these local initiatives, projects within the local community to then also mobilize and raise resources. Other means or ways that they've tried to remain sustainable is through obviously growing their membership base, the involvement of their local community. So when I think the expression of assets or resources beyond just financial means allows people the greater involvement of the community. Someone can come in with the skill, with the talent, with a physical resource, and that can contribute towards the sustainability of the community foundation. It's also networking and collaboration. This was evident really across all the entities that we profile in our book, that they realize that one, they're also not the only ones within the space. There's also areas of commonality and support. And so there is a concerted approach to really network and collaborate with others, and to help them to also then pool resources from different entities or groupings, to help support then their sustainability. And then obviously through securing grants to complement the local resources. And this is externally from, support through international foundations, donors, individual supporters to then help complement the local resources that they've been able to generate. Just in terms of challenges that we noted for the community foundations, obviously limited funding, and at times the needs within a local community outweigh the resources available. The unforeseen natural disasters or pandemics like COVID-19, which really put a strain and in a number of instances on, already stressed communities. The other challenge that we did also note was, at times, maybe the lack of adequate or skilled staff to carry out organizations' strategic objectives, so human resource capacity. And then finally, just the policy inconsistency and, government bureaucracy. Stuart alluded to that in terms of, really maybe then being a lack of supportive framework or infrastructure to really help nurture and flourish the work done by community foundations in Zimbabwe. And we also, we saw a lot of this, and in terms of policy inconsistency in the case of the community share ownership trusts, which were created, there was a legal mandate to create them, but then the necessary implementing framework or supporting framework for them to adequately do their work was never really seen through by the government. And they have, from the times some of them have been launched, they have then faced a number of challenges in terms of really carrying out their real strategic mandate and thrust, to make use of and to be able to mobilize and harness local resources generated through natural resource exploitation, in this particular case, mining companies, to then plow back and ensure that it's then also used for the benefit of local communities. And just the threats that community foundations face. So the operating space generally more broadly for civil society organizations in Zimbabwe is facing threats with the proposed amendments that that are being made within our through the Private Voluntary Organization Act. As we've highlighted, 22 of the 24 entities that we profiled were registered as trusts. And prior to even these amendments taking place, just the registration process to become a PVO was quite a difficult process, taking anywhere upwards of 24 months to do. And for those who've gone through it, you obviously need to engage the services of a legal professional. There are many steps and processes to go through. And for a lot of entities, then registering as a trust was the easier route. But the challenge is that if the amendments to the Act are put in place, one of the things that we have noted is that there actually is no kind of like bridging period or time period that entities that are registered as trusts maybe will have a grace period under which to then maybe transition to PVOs. So that means that if the law was to be amended and enacted today, a lot of these entities would have to stop their operations as they would be deemed to be illegal entities. But I think beyond that, as Stuart alluded to, there really needs to be, I think, a recognition of the significance and importance of the work that they're doing, and probably maybe a reframing or structuring of the necessary framework that really supports the uniqueness of what community foundations in Zimbabwe, and I guess across the continent, are doing. Some of the profiled entities have been in existence, for over 25, some even 35, close to 40 years. We have Jekesafungwa, which was established in the 1980s, and the two entities that we've profiled and have spoken about their work today, the African Self-Help Assistance Program and the Community Foundation for the Western Region of Zimbabwe, who've been in existence since the 1990s. Really the importance and value of their work, and what we've seen across all 24 case studies is that there really needs to be a more conducive environment to enhance the work that they're doing. There needs to be increased recognition of what they're doing and the importance and role they play really in terms of, community development, enhancing and advancing community agency, and ultimately promoting local and national development. And just our thoughts in terms of just the broader implications for development. So for us, the book and the case studies have demonstrated the existence of multiple forms of community philanthropy, organizations or associations which do not fall into the dominant definition of community foundation. I think, as Tinda has alluded to earlier, that one of the things that we want to do is really to showcase this uniqueness, but whilst we still use that terminology, it's really, to show that the way community foundations have been, I guess, described or defined, and especially through a Western lens, we're seeing something that, that takes on the posture of and has the characteristics of a community foundation. And then there's therefore need really to, I think, to expand beyond the traditional definitions, that we've seen, and also understanding that there are multiple forms and shapes and ways in which community foundations or community philanthropy can take place, dependent on the context. Something that I've alluded to already, that policy doesn't recognize the contribution of these entities to local and national development. And policy incentives are required, so these could be like tax exemptions. It could be a whole way and process of which they can then register that really takes into consideration the kind of work that they are doing. And then thirdly, for us, it's we realized that it's important that African community foundations do not necessarily mimic what exists in the global north. You know, so some of the earlier definitions, for example, you know, Hoyt's 1996 definition about community foundations being tax exempt, not for profit, having a permanent collection of endowment funds for the long-term benefit of a defined geographic area. Very little of that definition has come out in what we've seen with the entities that we've profiled. You know, none of the entities are tax exempt. Not, you know, they don't have endowed funds or permanent endowed funds. Community Foundation for the Western region of Zimbabwe was the closest to that, but obviously after the financial economic crisis in the early 2000s, you know, we've seen that that endowment fund was decimated. One of the things that we've noticed is that all our case studies really exhibit characteristics of associational community-based forms of giving. But finally for us, that, you know, this really was an exploratory study, and I think gives credence to further exploration into developing a broader narrative around community philanthropy associations, community foundations, community philanthropy. That's very much contextualized to, you know, country specific, but also I think more broadly continental specific in terms of the African continent. It will allow us to then really showcase what community philanthropy means for us within our context, what community foundations look like for us within our context, and push towards, I think, broadening the concept, you know, the ideas around it beyond what we've seen, you know, within the more traditional space and confines of what philanthropy is within, you know, global discussions and debates. Thanks, Belinda. I think my time is done.
Thank you so much, Eda. I think you've summarized very well the challenges, you know, and even some of the opportunities that we do have in terms of working with community foundations and the work that community foundations are doing on the ground. I'm going to move quickly back to Cosmo. Maybe we can let's try again for like 5 minutes. And then after this, we're going to give everyone else in the room an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. Cosmo, I'm going to give you 5 minutes just to complete the presentation that you had wanted to give earlier. Let's try again and just see if your network will hold. If it doesn't, it's fine. We'll just go back to the questions from the floor. No? Okay. All right, that's fine. So I'm going to open this up to the rest of the room. There are a number of people that are in here, highly respected as well. Would anybody like to make a comment or a contribution, or even to highlight the work that you are doing in your community foundation in a minute or two maximum? Okay, I see a hand up. Please unmute your mic and feel free to go for it. That's Judith. Judith Cowland, please feel free to go for it. Judith is with the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust.
Thank you very much, Belinda. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. You're loud and clear.
Yes, let me start by congratulating Silvio on this invaluable resource that you are putting out there that I definitely know will help a number of people. Congratulations on that. I just wanted to make, I don't know whether it's a question or a comment with regards one of the challenges that Eda raised is coming from the book, which is around human resource capacity. And so when I saw that one, in my mind, I'm thinking, is this now presenting a tension between the idea of philanthropy, where in the generic NGOs, you have salaried staff, and my appreciation of what community philanthropy, community foundations is about giving. So the idea of voluntarism, does it exist? And to what extent then does it contribute towards the staff issue, the human resource capacity issue? So maybe if there could be a bit of elaboration on that tension of giving and tension. And I know the issue of livelihood, right? So there's the element of giving, but then there's the reality of livelihood. How do you manage, or how is it managed within community philanthropy? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Judith. I will hand this over to one of our three authors. I'm not sure who would like to tackle it, between Dr. Marisa, Ella Joa, and Shelley. The question that Judith raises.
You know, we've not heard from Shelley. Maybe Shelley?
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Judith, for that question. So from the study that we carried out, we also noticed that there are many organizations that have volunteers that come in to volunteer their time, their expertise, and their resources as well. So I think it also bridges the whole gap in human resources. But like you have said, you know, everyone wants to make a living, and I think that is the main challenge, as to getting to a point where they can get something out of it. But most of the organizations have a volunteer base, and we have noted that from some organizations, they have sort of like phases where some volunteer for like 3 months, and they have another batch that comes, just so that, you know, at least people do not get tired, and they can sort of like justify, you know, not getting a little bit of income out of it, and also allow them to go and work elsewhere. So I hope I have addressed that question.
Eda and Dr. Marisa, any additional comments?
Eda?
Hi, yes, sorry, I was struggling to unmute. So I think definitely, Judith, I'm in agreement that that tension is definitely there. And I don't think it's something that's maybe it's unique to community foundations itself. I think it's even just broader within the nonprofit space. It's the tension is there. I think for us, it was uncovering that. I within the case studies, the entities mention it as a challenge, but for some of them, they really don't, you know, in terms of maybe a solution or trying to kind of figure out how best to manage that. It's not something that was explored in depth, but maybe I think it's something to look at, you know, as I said, in subsequent studies. But just kind of also linked to that, you know, for a lot of the entities, they also recognize, because of the need and want to involve, you know, youth in the processes and being part of the decision makers, and, you know, as trustees or as people involved in the community foundation. Some of them have tried to then take on like a social enterprise posture, you know, and then also then like have kind of initiatives or projects, but also I think in their broader programming around, you know, livelihoods and dealing with issues around education, you know, it's then trying to also then keep that skill and resource within the local area, because obviously once a local area also is not developing, people are always, or individuals are looking for greener pastures outside of their local geographic area, so there's that also that kind of like brain drain or loss, because of just the environment or the contextual conditions. So, I think in their programming, that's kind of like one way of trying to maybe address that or to kind of deal with that is then, how do you address some of those livelihood issues or challenges through your programming so that one, you're able then to retain that skills base or, human resource within that area that can then still contribute and have an impact in advancing the work that's being done by community foundations. But I think definitely it's a tension that needs to then continue to should be explored, I think, in further studies and as we delve deeper into community foundations and the work that they do.
Thank you so much, Eda. I think you've got another question there, but I think she answered that well. I'm gonna ask Ese and Mary, if you are comfortable just to make a comment. You had said something in the chat talking about how this has raised similar issues around community philanthropy and foundations, assets, capacity, and trust, the role of community foundations in the development of local philanthropy from, I think that's a presentation that was done by somebody else, but if you would like to make a comment on the synergy there, if you don't mind.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly. You can go ahead.
Hi, I didn't really want to add anything. I think my initial question around the leadership profile of what some of these institutions, the organizations that were highlighted in the report, I think that was answered already by the previous speaker. But really, I think my question around that area of inquiry was, if the challenges of leadership is something that needs to be watched out for. There's as people increase capacity, increase skills, increase technical knowledge in running these organizations, is there the risk or the fear that some of that institutional knowledge and skills would move to a bigger NGO or an INGO donor? I think that was sort of around my initial questioning, but that has been sort of addressed in the presentation from the last speaker. But in terms of the report on assets, capacity, and trust, and around solidarity and dignity, and the ways that community philanthropy supports that, I think that has already been echoed in many of the speakers that have spoken earlier. That it really isn't, the terminology or the technical words we use to describe some of these institutions can be limiting. And it's really about that solidarity piece that differentiates what community philanthropy looks like in the continent. Okay,
thank you so much for allowing me to call on you so suddenly, but thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Tendai Mrisa. Dr. Mrisa, if you've got any additional comments based on the questions that have come, please feel free to share, but also if you could just give us a vote of thanks. And like I said before, Dr. Mrisa is the Executive Director of Sevier Institute and lead writer in this case for this book. So Dr. Mrisa, I'm going to hand over to you to give any additional comments and to give us a vote of thanks.
Yeah, anyway, so I think before I do the vote of thanks, just maybe to say that one of the objectives of this study, which is actually a separate pillar of our work, is because our objective as an organization is to amplify the work that is done in communities around agency. So for us, agency is a more encapsulating term than maybe if you call it just philanthropy, because there are many other things that citizens do with each other. So related to this work is a training school. We've got what we're calling the Philanthropy School, But before we could even go there and begin to say, this is what we want to put in place, we had to make sure that we had an understanding of what is missing in the ecosystem, what community is struggling with, especially those who are in these groups, etc. So issues to do with leadership, with governance, with also communication to amplify their work, they come up in the study. And so it has helped us to even shape our own philanthropy school now to begin to say, these are the issues that we want to be sort of highlighting and training these leaders. We work closely with CAPSI, but we understand that there's a certain layer of sort of activity that is not yet ready maybe for the kind of postgraduate training that CAPSI offers. So we try to be that sort of, that stream. We try to be the bridge to start off with certain 101s around what does governance look like in these organizations. The reason being is it's just not about them doing the work that they are doing, but also the reason being is how do they attract more resources from individuals? So we are going to have, we're preparing a module around mobilizing resources from individuals. So this is individual giving. What do you need to put in place? So the book in itself is a resource fed to us in terms of informing what we're going to be doing going further, going forward. So that's number one. Then number two, there is also a tool that is already available on our website, which is called the Philanthropy Lab. So this has got resources for organizations that have access to our website. It's for free to begin to say, there's a manual around how to run your board. There's a manual around fundraising. There's a manual around just team building, manual around all the things that community foundations, how to keep a database of members, how to communicate with your members. So that we've already put in the Philanthropy Lab, which we hope that people can also then utilize. Then the third objective for us is to say, if you go into other jurisdictions, there are national associations or there's an infrastructure that supports these community foundations. At the moment, the community foundations that are active in Zimbabwe, they either belong to NANGO or other organizations, but NANGO, as good as it is, it's very broad. It supports many other entities. But we're trying to look at saying, how do we create a community of practice around these entities that mobilize local assets, local resources, that we can call community something, community foundation, community philanthropy, community givers, something like that. So we're not trying to be the secretariat, but to facilitate them establishing their own association, but we can provide the technical support. But now there's a basis for us to consider this work. Because when we were talking about it before the empirical evidence, it just sounded like we wanted to mimic what happens in other countries. But we realized that there is no infrastructure organization that support these entities in terms of ongoing capacity development, in terms of advocacy around policy issues that relate to this subsector within civil society. So I think those are important sort of takeaways for us as we move forward. Then finally, I think just to take time to thank colleagues, starting off with our colleague from Mott, Mamo. She couldn't be with us today, Mamo Mohapi. She lost her dad during the weekend, but she would have wanted to be here. She really has spent a bit of time trying to help us raise resources, but because of our geographic location here in Zimbabwe, it has been a bit difficult. But she managed, I don't know how she does it, but she managed to get us a pocket of money that we then use to carry out this study. If it had not been for that kind of sort of innovative thinking, we would not have been able to do the field work. So we're so grateful to Mamo and their work, and also the Mott Foundation in general. Then we're also grateful to colleagues like at Ford Foundation, who have always provided us with support, because this work would not have been done without their support. And grateful to our board that is very supportive. For those who don't know, Professor Beginkosi Moyo is also the chair of our board. So it's just not chairing from a governance perspective, but also the intellectual support from helping us sort of navigate some of these spaces, also in shaping our studies. Grateful to Halima for always being available. Yesterday, she kept on saying, I'm counting, there's a tab on the bar for all the times I just call upon you to say, comrade, we need this help. So grateful to you, Halima, and grateful to others, the sisters that I see in the room that have worked with us, Judith, and many others who may not be comfortable with me calling their names in the public, but who have helped us in this work for where we are. So grateful, and grateful for you all colleagues who made it to this platform and for 2 hours strong, having a discussion with us. Very grateful. But finally, and not the least, last but not least, is the foundations that we studied for opening your doors, allowing us to come with our questions, bothering you with back and forth questions, etc., and giving us the permission to write about you. We are so grateful, because in Zimbabwe, it's very difficult to do the kind of sort of opening up the way you did, because the kind of method that we have is like taking it from inside out and allowing us and having the confidence. For some of you were struggling, severe, what does severe mean? Severe, whatever, but you still accepted to talk to us. You talked to our field enumerators, gave us data, and your time, and also had the time to look at what we had written and make corrections where we had missed certain details. We're so grateful. Then there's the team of editors that worked with us to produce this book. They're not on the platform today, but we're so grateful to them for the work that they do. And yeah, back to you, Belinda. Thank you so much. And also thank you for moderating in such a very, helping us to have a conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mrisa. So this brings us to the end of our book launch, the Community Foundations in Zimbabwe book. I think we have posted a link to the book. You can access that from the Civio website or directly by following the link that is in the chat. Also, Eda Joa has posted a link to the Philanthropy Lab that Dr. Mrisa mentioned, which has all the resources for not just community foundations, but also any kind of organization. You will find resources there that will assist you as an organization or as an entity if you're trying to grow. And then again, the training school, that bridge that he was talking about for people who want to understand a bit more the elemental levels of philanthropy and what that looks like and what it means. You can find that there. He did obviously mention that CAPSI has higher level courses that are available. I think you can find those on the CAPSI website. But this is me saying thank you so much for sticking it through for 2 hours. We are 2.5 hours. We are ending it here. Thank you so much, but feel free to reach us through our website and to share online the recording from our Facebook page to anyone else who you think this might be relevant for. Thank you so much to everybody and have a good morning.
You say. You say.